Hello, everyone. We will start in 6 minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are starting now. My name is Aleodor Lazarescu, and I will be your host today for this MISTEC webinar. I am delighted that you are here, but I must admit I am a bit tense, with this being my first time as a MISTEC webinar host. English is not my native language. You see, I live in Bucharest, Romania. I know we're all over the news now, but this will be a discussion for another time. I was born in the middle of a Waldorf family, and this path of life led me to be a Waldorf student from kindergarten to the 8th grade. Then I continued my education in a traditional high school named Cantemir Vodă National College, graduating with honors. I enrolled as an engineering student at the Polytechnic University of Bucharest, where I developed web-based applications and studied industrial robot programming. Starting with my university period, I began translating several books dedicated to Waldorf pedagogy, as well as books dedicated to anthroposophical technology. This pushed me to an even deeper study of today's science, but also of Rudolf Steiner's work related to both pedagogy and technology. And that eventually led me to MISTEC. I am currently a trainer at the Waldorf Preschool Pedagogy course here in Bucharest. I also help middle school students in the field of mathematics. I coordinate several study groups in the field of moral anthroposophical technology and in the field of Waldorf pedagogy. Now that you know a bit about me, let me introduce our speaker today, Andrew Linnell. Today is the second Sunday in the Advent. As such, I extend a warm seasonal welcome to each of you. In today's MISTEC webinar, we'll take up an Advent theme. I want to say how much I appreciate that you have joined us today. These MISTEC webinars have brought to you a great variety of topics intended to help us deal with our spiritual development in this fifth post-Atlantean cultural age, an age of technology. Rudolf Steiner always pointed to the act of Christ appearing in our times in the etheric as the great counterbalance to the necessary Ahrimanic influence. Today, Andrew Linnell, the co-founder of MISTEC, will speak on the theme Preparing for the Birth of Christ. As the Christ mystic Angelus Silesius said, if Christ were born in Bethlehem 1,000 times, yet not in thee, then art thou lost eternally. Andrew has formed 8 study courses that typically meet online. These are 12-week courses using excerpts from Rudolf Steiner's lectures and books on particular themes, such as the destiny of the human body, refined breeding, and the mysteries of evil. Registration for the January through March terms opens soon at mistec.org. Andrew lives near Boston and is the president of its anthroposophical branch. He is a member of the School for Spiritual Science and its Natural Science section. Our next MISTEC webinar will be on the 12th of January, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, with Bobby Garcia, the founder of Insight, who will speak not only about his company and freefolding, but also about his path through prison to anthroposophy because of the help of the Anthroposophical Prison Outreach Program. By the way, recordings of all of these webinars are available on the website, mistec.org. And now, with great pleasure, I turn this over to you, Andrew.
Gee, thank you so much, Aleodor. And that was a wonderful introduction and welcome. And I hope all of you who are here also feel that warmth and welcome here. And as we heard, we are now in the second week of Advent. This is a time of preparation, a preparation for what? As the Christian mystic, as you heard, Angelus Silesius said, and I'll repeat it one more time, if Christ were born in Bethlehem 1,000 times and not in thee, then art thou lost eternally. Yes, inwardly we prepare at this time for the Christ to be born in us. Christmas time is known to be the yearly peak in stress. Our souls feel a sense of superficiality in how we celebrate Christmas. We might love to sing Christmas carols, but are the new ones about Christmas anymore? We send greeting cards to our friends and family, and we pine over what will be just the right presents for those people who really mean something to us. Do we really do any of this out of love? We know well that Christmas has vanished behind its commercialization. Is it a lost cause, or is it possible to renew Christmas? Has the being Christ Jesus been reduced to merely the man, Jesus of Nazareth? Hopefully, our response to this commercialized Christmas will become striving for something new. A new reality must be born. Christianity needs an impulse for renewal. For, inasmuch as Christianity no longer understands the Christ being in Jesus of Nazareth, it has lost its meaning and purpose. The meaning and essence of Christianity must be found again. Humanity must learn again to realize that the mystery of Golgotha can be comprehended only in the light of supersensible knowledge. I'll now read this verse that I feel fits where we are in the evolution of Christmas. The stars once spoke to man. It is world destiny that they are silent now. To be aware of the silence can become pain for earthly man. But in the deepening silence, there grows and ripens what mankind speaks to the stars. To be aware of this speaking can become strength for spirit man. Yes, we are now in Advent, a time of preparation. Of course, this talk is about how to prepare for an inner experience that results in you being able to say, as St. Paul did, no longer I, but Christ in me. How can one prepare for this? Well, you're not going to get a recipe, but I hope to offer sufficient ingredients for you to bake yourself into a holiday treat. The ingredients are the soul preparations done similarly to those done in the course of evolution by humans who prepared for Christ to enter a human body and become human. Knowing of these preparations, which I'll talk about, can inspire us to prepare our own nourishing Christmas cake for others. My inspiration came a year ago. As I was doing my daily meditation, inwardly I heard a voice say, if you look up now, you will see the etheric Christ. Do you want to see him? In that moment, I'm embarrassed to say, I thought about how St. Francis, out of a similar experience, had his life changed, as shown in this Giotto fresco. And so in that moment, I asked myself, should I look? For if I do, would I then make drastic changes in my life? I wondered, if I look, will I need to give up my possessions, my marriage, my family, and go off and live a totally different life? I felt unease at giving up my comforts and security. And in that moment, the voice said, you're not ready. And with that, I knew I was unprepared to experience Christ in the etheric. but such an experience is needed for the renewal of Christianity. In this talk, I'm not setting the goal for your preparation to be that high, but I will say that for each interchange, there is a sacrifice. I may have failed in that opportunity, but I did learn that in one's preparation, one should ask oneself, what am I willing to sacrifice? We might ask, did Rudolf Steiner in his lectures help the members prepare for Christmas? Certainly the calendar of soul verses are very helpful. Here is a partial list wherein we find common themes on soul work, health and illness, and also studies of the ancient mysteries and their influence on art. We discover in these Christ the healer. Then, following the winter solstice, the feeling of hope once again rays into the earth as well as into our souls. These rays of light and life and love we know come from the realm of the sun. These rays come to quicken the earth and our souls from contemplation to fruitfulness. The kingdom of the Spirit has placed a seed into each soul, but some seeds fell upon a rock, and some fell among thorns, while others fell on good ground, sprouted, and bore fruit 100-fold. From Rudolf Steiner, we know much about the ancient mysteries and how these prepared us for the coming of the sun god to save us from the fall, from going too far. The coming of the sun god? That doesn't sound Christian. This prophecy goes back to ancient Persian times and its mysteries, with Zarathustra as its originator. For them, the sun was the representative of the outer cosmos. The sun was the divine source of light. Later, the Egyptians and Chaldeans concluded that all was created and shaped out of spiritual sympathetic affirmations or antipathetic negation. For them, the sun was the divine source of life. As evolution progressed, in the Greco-cultural age, the sun appeared as their source of love. Looking further back to the Atlantean epic, we find 7 oracles. After the flood, in the post-Atlantean epic, these oracles evolved into the mystery centers. Into these mysteries, from the hallowed realm of the sun, the cosmic intelligence poured down in such a way that the great teachers of humanity received truly spiritual ideas, thoughts, and concepts. And in these mysteries, indications were given of what must come to pass in the future. All this has had to vanish from earthly life. We see what was there only when we look clairvoyantly back into antiquity, that stage by stage we see the mysteries disappearing from earthly evolution, especially during the time of Alexander. From this clairvoyant perspective, we see below the cosmic intelligence become earthly as it spread to gradually become our individual intelligence that we needed for freedom. What came after the mysteries? Materialism, when our perception was limited to just the physical realm. In our sense organ, the outer world penetrates. Into our eye comes divine activity. This divine activity weaves through the world surrounding us. What comes in through our senses is a kind of inhalation of the 4 ethers. Steiner called this refined breathing. By bringing our consciousness to it, as was done with yoga a few millennia ago, we have a way to come to experience the realm where we can find the Christ today, namely in the etheric. And this could become the new yoga. One of the important foundations for a renewal of Christmas is the concept of the Holy Trinity. To grasp this, here are some helpful words from Rudolf Steiner, quoting, "When we look at prehistoric times in the Akashic record, they give no information of a Trinity. In ancient India, one finds unity was the concept of all existence. In ancient Persia, the duality of good and evil, of light and dark, was taught in the religion of Zarathustra. Humans were not yet concerned with a Trinity until the Egyptian cultural age. Through our recognition, first of the unity, then the duality, and then Trinity, we were also led to the concepts of Atman, Buddhi, and Manas, for these are the future goals of mankind. Back then, initiates could look up to the threefold aspect of the Godhead and perceive a divine Trinity. These ancients sought the divine in the realm of being that precedes birth, in the realm of pre-existence. Thus, ex Deo Nosimer, the Father principle. It was followed in the bloodline. This led us from unbornness to earthly life where death stood at the end. With Christianity, we learned that we could die in Christ. Through the principle of death from the Father that is within each of us, we could then unite with Christ in Christo Morimur. But the human being's new consciousness could be awakened only through the Holy Spirit, the being sent to us at Pentecost by Christ, per spiritum sanctum revivissimus. Thus, the Father is the unbegotten begetter, the Son is the one begotten by the Father, and that the Holy Spirit is the one imparted to humanity by the Father and the Son. Father does so at the baptism of Jesus. Christ does so when he sent the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. This was known to the wisdom of initiation living in the earliest Christian centuries. However, it covered over and buried. Today, the divine principle working in Christianity, within evolving Christianity, can no longer be understood without the Trinity. When we evolve in the sixth cultural age, then the reality of duality will return. And finally, in the seventh cultural age, the reality of unity will emerge anew to complete what was begun during ancient India. In order to allow humans to become free, the spiritual world knew that it had to withdraw from its active participation in human evolution. This withdrawal led, of course, to the decay of the mystery centers that were prevalent in all parts of the world. Aristotle could foresee this dramatic change coming to humanity, so he prepared Alexander to go out into the world where the mystery centers existed, and there to set up libraries wherein future students could find the secrets of those mystery centers preserved. Of course, this was against the sacred rules of those mysteries, so he had to do this via conquest. Putting such wisdom to pen and paper was considered a mortal sin, a blasphemy. Through conquest, Alexander set up libraries in 72 locations where mystery centers had been, each called Alexandria, with one in Egypt the most famous. Here, mystic texts of Hermes Trismegistus and hundreds of others could be found. Rudolf Steiner tells us that Zarathustra's perfected astral body was given to Hermes, and his etheric body was given to Moses. When the family of Jesus in Matthew fled to Egypt, there that child could bathe in this environment. Over the centuries, much has been lost, but some was recorded for future generations, such as the work done by the Grimm brothers to capture the Germanic fairy tales before they were lost. In the 4th century, Augustine, like Aristotle, attained some insight to his times and to what was coming. He realized that the Gnostic path of knowledge was closing and a new one was needed to save Christianity. By extending the meaning of faith, Augustine instituted belief in the Bible, well, belief in the New Testament, and the traditions handed down by the apostles. Augustine knew of the mysteries and their role in the preparation for Christ. He said of those in those mysteries that they were Christian before the term came into being. Then in the 6th century, Emperor Justinian enabled his troops and mobs within the Roman Empire to tear down all the remaining mystery centers. Their teachers fled eastward, with most coming to the educational institution known as Gandhi Shapur near Baghdad. Humanity in Roman Europe was left without ties to the ancient mysteries. Eventually, faith became a focus on just Jesus the man, spirit in matter, elemental beings, angels, and beings of the hierarchies all faded away. No wonder materialism would eventually find its way even into Christianity. Such was the price paid for our freedom. All we had left were traditions. We no longer could experience the spiritual world. All we could experience was what our physical senses provided. But this enabled freedom. Sorry, I forgot to hit the advances. And so, by the start of the Renaissance, Jesus was considered Christ at birth. This mystical nativity by Sandro Botticelli in 1501 combines the kings of Matthew and the shepherds of Luke into one painting. We see 3 kings on the left, 2 shepherds on the right, Joseph sleeping, according to Luke, plus an ox and ass within the cave. And of course, 12 archangels above, 3 archangels midway, and angels and demons everywhere on the ground. Botticelli was depicting the joining of heaven and earth through the birth of Jesus Christ. The cave is meant as a symbol of the physical body within which one finds the soul. In this one, Filippo Lippi portrays the view that Jesus was born as God in a human body. This had become the theological perspective in the Roman Church by then, where then was 1463. Lippi used the symbols normally used in scenes of the baptism to show the dove descending to Jesus. With this view, the significance of the baptism lost its meaning. So when was the birth of Christ? This festival was celebrated on the 6th of January as a commemoration of the baptism in the Jordan. And this festival of remembrance included the thought that through the baptism in the Jordan, the Christ had come down from the heavens and united himself with human nature in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. A heavenly force had united with the earth, and that through this intervention of the heavens, the evolution of humanity had received a new impulse. As the outer power of Christianity increased, the inner understanding of the Christ mystery decreased, and thus the festival of the 6th of January ceased to have any essential meaning. The birth of Christ was then placed 13 days earlier, coincident, as envisioned, with the birth of Jesus. But although the error would seem to point to the loss of a great truth, Steiner points out profound meaning lay behind it. Although the men responsible knew nothing of it, according to Steiner, we cannot but marvel at the subconscious wisdom with which the festival of Christmas Day was instituted. And Steiner added, quote, "It is correct to name the 6th of January as the day of Christ's birth, and these 13 nights as the time during which the powers of seership in the human soul discern and perceive what each of us must undergo during our life from all that originated in humanity since the incarnations of Adam and Eve," end quote. But let me stick with our Christmas theme. Both of these frescoes by Giotto are near each other in the same cathedral. Here we see the Matthew story. We see an active Joseph with a dark beard, while here in the Luke story, we see a removed, inactive Joseph. They do not appear to be the same man, and certainly not the same age. Luke does not mention a star, nor a fleeing to Egypt, nor killing of babies that are central to Matthew's nativity. In Luke, the family is from Nazareth. They had to travel to Bethlehem to register for a census and pay their tax. In Matthew, Jesus is born in the family home in Bethlehem. Who were these kings and shepherds? With ancient Persia, mysteries that intended to spiritualize the earth had emerged. In the Egyptian cultural age, these continued into building temples and pyramids. Perhaps this was when Freemasonry began. Temple building continued into Greco-Roman times and on to the building of Gothic cathedrals. We might ask, what do we create today with our thinking? Well, this stream that I just described is represented by the three kings. Melchior is the representative of the principle of wisdom, of intelligence, which is the task of our current fifth epoch. This is symbolized by his offering, gold. The principle of sacramental offering, the spiritualization of matter, this began in the fourth, or the Atlantean epoch, and it is to be completed in the sixth epoch. This is represented by the gift of Balthazar, frankincense. Casper's gift, myrrh, is the symbol of death that was first experienced during the third or Lemurian epoch. Myrrh represents not just death, but also resurrection. Thus, the kings represent the third, fourth, fifth, and also pointing to the sixth of the great epochs, the Lemurian, Atlantean, our current epoch, and the next. These magi are initiates of the Zarathustrian mysteries. Now, the three kings come with three esoteric gifts. So then, what is offered in Luke's nativity? With poor shepherds, they'd come to adore, and we see the connection to Abel, who was himself a shepherd. Abel's gesture is to accept God's gifts as given, as they exist, and to thus live in confidence that God will provide whatever is needed. One's focus then is not upon the earth, but upon God. One shows one's gratitude with burnt offerings. His lineage led to the priests. Abel's burnt offerings are from the animal realm, that which is higher and has astrality within, higher than the plant kingdom, I should say. Here we see a mosaic from San Vitale in Ravenna showing the sacrifices of Abel and the high priest of the sun, Melchizedek, whose offering, like Cain's offering, is from the plant kingdom. The artist here has shown both of these two as priestly lines, with Abel associated with Yahweh and the moon, and Melchizedek associated with the sun. This crucifixion is by Bramantino, who lived in Milan and studied with Leonardo da Vinci at his academy in Milan. Note that he paints both the sun and moon. The deeds of both sun and moon play into this cosmic event, the mystery upon Golgotha, that was prepared in part by both Melchizedek and Abel. To the ancient Persians, the mysteries of the sun had to do with it being the actual reflector of the light weaving through space. To the Egyptians and Chaldeans, the sun was also the life surging and pulsing through the universe. And for the Greeks, they felt the sun as that which was infused with love that permeated into living organisms. But in the 4th century, there were schools which taught that the sun mystery must remain untold, that a civilization knowing nothing of the sun mystery must now arise. Behind everything that takes place in the external world lie forces and powers which give guidance from the universe. One of the instruments of these guiding powers was that Roman Emperor Constantine. It was under him that Christianity assumed the form which denies the sun. After Constantine as emperor came Julian the Apostate. He carried a love for what he had learned in the mysteries and found that to be superior to what he was able to learn about Christianity, even though he learned but the last remnants of those ancient mysteries. Julian the Apostate was murdered by some of his own Christian soldiers as he came into Persia seeking initiation into its sun mysteries, because he was intent upon reviving this ancient tradition of the threefold mystery of the sun. The guiding powers of the world sought to prevent it. If today we seek to revive it, we must realize that we can only do so if this old instinctive wisdom can become conscious wisdom. That what has sunk into the subconscious, into purely organic activity, and even into suborganic activity, that must once again be lifted into the light of consciousness. Yes, we must rediscover the sun mystery as part of our annual Advent preparations. This sun mystery was felt to be the greatest spiritual treasure possessed by mankind, and it was symbolized by what was known as the Palladium. This Palladium had once been in Troy. Then the Palladium was taken to Rome, but its presence there was a secret known only to the initiates in Rome. These initiated priests of the Romans and even the first emperors, Augustus, for example, worked in the world out of a direct consciousness that the greatest of all treasures was present in Rome. The existence of the Palladium was known only to those who were initiated into the deepest secrets of Roman existence and its destiny. But in a spiritual sense, it had become known to those whose task it was to bring Christianity to the world. And out of the knowledge that the Palladium was guarded in Rome, the early Christians were drawn thither. A spiritual reality lay behind these journeys. Now, under Constantine, Christianity was secularized. He moved the Palladium to Constantinople and buried it under a pillar. Thus, for its further development, Roman Christianity was deprived of the knowledge and presence of the Sun mystery by the very emperor who established Christianity in Rome. In this way, the cosmic wisdom was lost to Christianity, and this came to expression in the removal of the Palladium from Rome to Constantinople. Now, there is a legend that the Palladium was, perhaps in the 9th century, secretly moved from Constantinople, first to Kiev and then to Moscow. And Steiner does mention its possible removal to a Slavic region, but adds that, quote, the Palladium is waiting, expecting to be removed from the darkening influence shed upon it by Constantinople to that locality which, by its very nature, will bring it into complete darkness. Will bring it into complete darkness. Yes, the Palladium goes to the east, where the decadence of the ancient wisdom still survives, but is passing into darkness. And in the further evolution of the world, everything depends on whether this Palladium becomes illuminated by a wisdom born from the riches of the knowledge living in the West. Living in the West. The Palladium, the ancient heritage brought from Troy to Rome, from Rome to Constantinople, and which, as it is said, will be carried still further into the darkness of the East. This sun treasure must wait until it is redeemed spiritually by the West, released from the dark shadows of a purely external knowledge of nature. This sun treasure must receive new light from the West and only from the West. And in case you're wondering, that's from GA 208 from 1921 and the 6th of November. Modern Christianity has very little knowledge or understanding of the profundity of the discussions that were carried on among the wise church fathers in the first centuries of Christendom as to the manner in which the two natures, that is, the divine and the human, had to be united in the personality of Jesus of Nazareth. In the early Christian centuries, this was a mystery which addressed itself to a living wisdom, a wisdom which then faded away into empty abstractions. Very little has remained in Western Christianity of the holy zeal with which men tried to understand how the divine and the human had been united in the mystery upon Golgotha. But the Christian impulse is mighty and powerful, and it was the power of love which came to replace the wisdom with which the mystery of Golgotha had been greeted at the time when its radiance shone over the earth. In marvelous abundance, love has been poured out through the centuries from the minds and hearts of people to the Jesus child in the manger. Just as the peoples of the Old Testament strove in wisdom to be gathered to the fathers, so the peoples of the New Testament have striven in devotion and love to gather together at Christmas around the sinless child in the manger. Through the mystery of Golgotha, Christ, the sublime being of the Son, has come down to the earth. He has descended from the Son to the earth, entering into the body of Jesus and uniting himself with earth's destiny. But although the Christ being has remained united with the earth, it has not been possible through the succeeding rulerships of the archangeloi, that is, from the time of the mystery of Golgotha until that of the dominion of Gabriel, for the Christ impulse itself actually to lay hold of the inner physical and etheric forces of mankind. This became possible for the first time under the Gabriel impulse, which began to work about 300 years before the Michael impulse in 1879. Thus, in reality, it is only since that time that by way of the forces of heredity themselves, the Christ impulse has been able to penetrate humanity inwardly. As yet, this has not been achieved. For the Christ event to be for all of humanity, there had to be a fusing of the dualities in the streams of humanity. This was to be presented in two Jesus boys, just as prophesied by the Essenes, who prophesied both a kingly and a priestly Messiah were to come, and subsequently they would be made into one in thine hand. This meant that humans representing Cain and Abel, Freemason and Jesuit, Aristotelian and Platonist, etc., needed to be fused into one. Thus, the physical, etheric, and astral bodies had to be specially prepared for Christ to enter the sheaths of a human being in order to fully become human. A physical body and an etheric body of this caliber could become a fitting instrument only if indwelt by the greatest individuality, namely Zarathustra, who had prepared mankind to understand the Christ as the Son God. This instrument could harbor the Zarathustra individuality for as long as it made development possible, and that would be until the 12th or 13th year, before the onslaught of puberty. And this individuality had then to pass out of the body of the Matthew Jesus and into the body of the Luke Jesus, wherein the astral and ego could be brought to perfection. The writer of the Matthew Gospel then turned his attention away from the Matthew Jesus to the Luke Jesus to continue to follow the life of Zarathustra, now in the body of the Luke Jesus, until the 30th year. That was the time when Zarathustra had brought the astral body and ego bearer to the stage where he could offer up all bodily members, all the sheaths, to the descending Sun Spirit. All this is indicated in the scene of the baptism by John. For early Christianity, this was the important birth of Christ. And the Gospels in the time of early Christianity had the words, "Today I have begotten thee," which were changed later to, "This is my Son in whom I am well pleased." Now I'm going to change our focus on preparation to Leonardo da Vinci, whose life's work revealed these esoteric secrets of Christianity that you've just heard. In history, he was a giant of wisdom upon whose shoulders later scientists and artists stood. Leonardo sowed the seeds of our times, and I think he is a good example of how to prepare for the birth of Christ within. You will find many glorious terms applied to this great individual, but you will not find his private life described in his biographies, except when they're speculating. That's because he protected his private life, and so nothing is really known of it. Given his stature, I presumed he was an initiate. As such, as I will attempt to show, he was aware of this deeper meaning of Christianity and those prophecies that there were two messiahs which could be made one in God's hand. You see, at the age of 28, Leonardo was already part of the Medici household. He also became a member of the Garden of San Marcos, where he had access to its library of theological content, as well as its gardens, where he could walk and talk with the leading philosophers of his time. There is an odd journal entry in his notebook that says, "The Medicis made me, and the Medici destroyed me." Could he be referring to the Medici role in bringing him to a form of initiation? Florence at this time was home to many secret schools. One we do know about is the Platonic Academy, headed by Marsilio Ficino. Yet, knowing of the watchful eye of the inquisitors, Leonardo thereby kept his private life private. Now, who was Ficino? Was he an initiate? Several famous Florentines were members, including philosopher Pico della Mirandola and the Aristotelian John Argyropoulos, who was from Constantinople. Steiner and historians point to the importance of the rebirth of Greek philosophy at the start of the Renaissance. In fact, Greek artifacts that had been brought to Italy by the Romans were being dug up and displayed. But any interest in paganism from Greece or its mysticism was held at bay because of the Inquisition. Too much interest in its paganism could lead to your death. Leonardo would have to be extremely careful to study such things that were hidden yet present in Florence and likely known to the Medicis. Now, to understand this Platonic Academy and its role, we must take a step back in history to study an amazing individual, George Gemistus Plethon. In 1428, Byzantine Emperor John VIII asked him, as the wisest man in his empire, "Dear Plethon, how can we unify the split Christian churches?" For the East and West had been split since 1054. John sought to reunite the sees of Rome and Constantinople. Perhaps he was also motivated by his fear of the growing strength of the Ottoman Empire. Then, a decade later, in 1438, his efforts led to the Council of Florence that attempted to reconcile this East-West schism. Plethon accompanied John's envoys because of his renowned wisdom and morality, even though, as a pagan, he was not allowed to take part in the meetings. Instead, he offered lectures to the Florentines that were attended by its aristocracy. Cosimo de' Medici was so impressed, he enthusiastically set up a temporary school headed by Plethon that later becomes the Accademia Platonica with Marsilio Ficino as its head. Students of Plethon continued to teach there well after the council ended. Plethon's lectures on Plato and Aristotle were summarized in the book On the Differences of Aristotle from Plato, but his other lectures, however, are no longer known. His astounding work in this academy inspired the Renaissance paintings on Greek mythology. He was called a prince among philosophers. Importantly, he was well versed not only in Plato and Aristotle, but also in Zarathustra, Hermes Trismegistus, Heraclitus, Philo, and many, many others. Marsilio Ficino called him the second Plato, while Florence's Cardinal Bessarion speculated as to whether Plato's soul occupied his body. Likely knowing the fate of the Byzantine Empire, Plethon brought with him a trunk full of books and allowed the Medici team to translate them from Greek to Latin. This became part of the library of the Platonic Academy, but they all disappeared by the 16th century. In 1440, Plethon returned to Greece to found, of all things, a mystery center in a town that later becomes known as Mystra, and that was near Sparta. Clearly, only a Hierophant could do so. Thus, the question, did he train anyone else to be a Hierophant for that academy? If so, did that person initiate Leonardo? And I think that person was Ficino. All spiritual development must be met with resistance. Not only was there the Inquisition, but also a particular individual who saw it as his religious obligation to clear the air for the coming of New Jerusalem. This individual was Girolamo Savonarola, a Dominican friar and preacher. In 1482, he arrived in Florence and he called for a Christian renewal and denounced clerical corruption, despotic rule, and the exploitation of the poor. He gained a large following for that. And then he later turned on the ruling Medici. He instituted a puritanical campaign enlisting the active help of Florentine youth to destroy any and all art, quote, intended for the vain, unquote. And because of this, Leonardo left Florence for Milan. Savonarola eventually succeeded in exiling the Medici and gaining political control of Florence. But when he refused to have Florence send soldiers to join a war against France, the Pope and popular opinion turned against him. Under torture, Savonarola confessed that he had invented his visions and prophecies, and so in 1498 he was burned in Florence. The Medici were then restored to power, and several of their children later become pope. But the Medici cultural magic had vanished by 1492 when Lorenzo de' Medici had died. In 1481, Leonardo had reached the heights of artistic recognition. This would establish him, that you see here, as the Florentine master. But he never completes this adoration of the Magi. Art historians have marveled at this. Why did Leonardo just abandon it? Could he not have taken it with him and worked on it more after he arrived in Milan? For me, this is a clue that Leonardo, here in his 30th year, received an initiation that so profoundly changed him that he knew he could no longer work on this painting because it signified dogma and not the full truth. Now we'll explore what Leonardo subsequently took up and presented to us, not only through his paintings, but through those of his students. Both of these paintings have the title Virgin of the Rocks. One is hung in the National Gallery of London, while the other is in the Louvre of Paris. The Louvre is considered to be the original, begun while Leonardo was still in Florence, while the other was done in Leonardo's studio in Milan, with other artists participating. Note the differences. The archangel on the right is pointing across to the child on the left. She wears quite different colors, and the skin tones are quite different. One can say that the painting on the right has sun colors, whereas the painting on the left has moon colors. We also can notice, if you could see the actual paintings, that the halos and the staff of John the Baptist were added on top of the varnish of the one on the left. This means the painting was completed by the team of artists, and these additions were then made afterwards. When this painting on the left was restored a decade ago, I don't know how they dealt with this. There are some other important differences, the plant life, the reflecting pool, but we just don't have time to cover all of these. In Renaissance painting, especially those of the Florentine school, hand gestures were used to help tell a story or act as symbols. Here, the sleeve of the central figure provides a stage for the hand gestures of importance. In the painting on the right, we see within this enclosure 3 hands of 3 characters each with a different gesture. Leonardo and his students did extensive studies of kissing babies. The Gnostic text had been destroyed 1,000 years earlier, but its Pistis Sophia survived, and it was available to Leonardo. It has been assumed that these 2 boys are Jesus and John the Baptist. But in the Pistis Sophia, there is a scene in chapter 60 where 2 different boys, both named Jesus, who knew each other, are brought together. And it says, they kiss each other and they become one, merged. Over 30 such paintings are known to exist that have ties to Leonardo or his academy. And here we see just one called Holy Infants Embracing. And this one by Joos van Cleve, who became known as the Leonardo of the North. Notice the Holy Spirit descending as a white dove. And of course, that's from the scene of the baptism. And do you have a sense to which one of the 2 it descends? Here we compare Virgin of the Rocks to Bernardino Luini's Holy Family. Note also the tilt of the Madonna's head is the same in both. Let's look again at hand gestures. The Madonna's hands in Luini's painting serve no function except to point us to the central figure of Virgin of the Rocks. Why did Luini mix the scenes from Virgin of the Rocks and Holy Infants Embracing? Well, Luini was a student of Leonardo. So is he telling us that he knows a secret? The Holy Infants Embracing theme was also used in several Madonna studies done by different Leonardo students. Here's one we see called the Thulin Madonna by Marco D'Aggiano, who was a student of Leonardo. It too has these kissing babes. Note her hand gestures. Her left hand is on the Book of Wisdom. And what do you suppose her right hand is doing? Here we shall compare Bernardino da Conti's painting and comparing it to the original Virgin of the Rocks. We see Madonna's hands reversed, and so are the children. This can only mean that the 2 children of Virgin of the Rocks are the same 2 children of Holy Infants Embracing, but on different sides. And Da Conti is telling us that the central figure is bestowing wisdom to the child on the left from the Book of Wisdom, while in Leonardo's painting, the bestowal is from the kneeling boy to the sitting boy. By using the same background, Da Conti was definitely trying to inform us that his painting reveals something important about his master's original Virgin of the Rocks. Now, with this painting, we'll have some fun. It's called The 3 Children. Bernardino da Conti played a key role in the revelation of the mystery of the Virgin of the Rocks. Here we have the familiar 2 children from Virgin of the Rocks. Now, who do you suppose is in their midst? The Madonna, right? Nope. With John the Baptist in the middle, that begs the question, who are the other 2? Note, we have the exact Virgin of the Rock poses by those other 2. This time the boys are not reversed. The one on our left has royal robes. And note the halo of Jesus with its 3 crosses foreshadowing Golgotha. Note the hands of both boys, identical to those of Virgin of the Rocks. So why is John here between them? He is hinting at the needed transfer from the kneeling one to the sitting one to prepare for baptism. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to do that again. We see these paintings now speaking to each other. Note in the central figure, both have the now familiar head tilt. Different, have similar gestures. We can now conclude that the kneeling boy is not John the Baptist, but then who is this boy on the left? The one who has the 3 crosses for halo, that must be Jesus, but who is the kneeling boy with a royal robe? Leonardo, with his brilliance, certainly could see that the nativities of Matthew and Luke were not the same. His initiation would have subsequently allowed him to explore the Akashic record and see who these 2 boys, both named Jesus, were in those days. In the Matthew Gospel, this Jesus had great wisdom attained through many earthlives, depicted above him by the pillars you see in the background, through which runs a river, perhaps the river Styx. In the window above the Luke Jesus, there is just one pillar. This was the first incarnation of this being, who, according to Rudolf Steiner's investigation of the Akashic, was Adam Kadmon. And Adam Kadmon would be the archetype intended for humanity by the 7 Elohim before the influence of Lucifer and the fall of man. This archetype was held back so that it would remain uncorrupted by humanity's entry into the physical, held back until this moment in evolution. Now, if such knowledge existed in various early Christian communities, would there not be some evidence? Early in the first 2 centuries, so-called heretics were excommunicated or sent into exile. But after the 3rd century, heretics were not only put to death, but everything, their books, paintings, all this kind of stuff were burned. But here we see a surviving example, done in the relative safety of a painting, supposedly of 2 saints. But here you see 2 12-year-old boys, and they each have a halo. The painting seems to say, through their halos, or the spiritual, that they will merge for the purpose of the coming Christ. So what evidence do we have that Leonardo knew about this merging? Well, his students, they took up this cause, for it would have been far too dangerous for Leonardo to spell out the story in his art. This Jesus among the doctors is by Bernardino de Beto, also known as Pinturicchio. And he finished this in 1501. Leonardo fled Milan in 1499 due to the Second Italian War. The books of the learned doctors have been thrown on the ground, symbolic that their knowledge fades in the face of this 12-year-old boy. Note his halo with a red cross inscribed. Now we can look at his hand gesture. It says the 2 will become one. We notice the feet. On our right, the child with the halo is standing on the earth, barefoot. On the left, both children's feet are lifted off the earth, one by socks and one by shoes. Of these 2 children, one is well dressed, the other poorly dressed, or shepherd's dress. Kingly and priestly, perhaps? They are both departing. They represent the 2 children as they once were, but will no longer be. We see that these 2 boys are framed by 5 individuals. Their clothing colors go from left to right: black, blue, gold, green, and magenta, and in the 5th, a royal purple. Each of the 4 carry an object in their hand. The 4 facing the 2 children represent the physical, black, soma, blue, psyche, gold, and pneuma, the rose green. And this fifth is the Hierophant, who performed the spiritual merging of these two within the Holy of the Holies. And the result was the boy with a halo. And that's Joseph and Mary coming in from the right. Through his students, Leonardo addresses how the two became one. This is Jesus Among the Doctors by Leonardo's student Bernardino Luini. Look at the hand gesture over the heart. Jesus saying, the two became one. Leonardo, for his safety, does not directly show us esoteric secrets. Rather, he uses his students to indirectly reveal this knowledge to us. It was Leonardo's students who paint the scene where the two children become united. This merging is told in Luke when Jesus was 12 years old. The family, with many others from Nazareth, had come to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. Jesus was somehow left behind, and for 3.5 days, his parents searched, finally finding him in the temple, conversing with its doctors. Let's listen to their conversation. Quote from Luke. His mother said to him, Son, why hast thou dealt with us this way? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee for over 3 days with much sorrowing. And he said to them, How is it that ye sought me? Did you not know that it was necessary for me to be here in my Father's house? Here again, I need to express my appreciation to Rudolf Steiner, who described that this merger occurred within the Holy of the Holies in the temple in Jerusalem, and thus it took over 3 days for his parents to find him. As a transformed Jesus, his parents were amazed at his newfound knowledge and wisdom. Now Luke continues with the words, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject unto them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Now, was it a merger of the Cain and Abel streams? There is insufficient time to delve deeply enough into all these mysteries. But we found that Leonardo, with the help of his students, was able to show how Christ came for all of humanity. Embedded in the stories of Matthew and Luke were two different streams of humanity that reached their resolution by the merging out of love within the Holy of the Holies of these two streams. Within these dualities merged, Christ could enter such a human body at the baptism. This story, if told solely by Leonardo, would have led him to be condemned to death by the Inquisition. By spreading the story out over so many paintings and painters, a mystery was revealed in plain sight that was yet invisible to the Inquisition. Sheer genius on the part of Leonardo. In this vein, I found it fascinating that Rudolf Steiner said that it was part of his mission to unite the Cain and Abel streams within humanity. And I find he's done that in these lectures on the Gospels of Luke and the Gospels of Matthew. Thus, our preparation for the birth of Christ is to unite within our souls that which will rebalance us and merge us for all of humanity. And how do I discover this in me? One tip, do I condemn them? Do I say they with any hatred? This is something I think we all can work on. So I'd like to close with these apt words from the Foundation Stone meditation. At the turning point of time, the spirit light of the world entered the stream of earthly evolution. Darkness of night had held its sway. Day, radiant light, poured into the souls of men, light that gave warmth to simple shepherds' hearts, light that enlightened the wise heads of kings. O light divine, O Son of Christ, warm thou our hearts, enlighten thou our heads, that good may become what from our hearts we would found, and from our heads direct with single purpose. As a final note, back in 1976, my girlfriend then was reading a book called Man and the World in the Light of Anthroposophy by Stuart Easton. When she told me about these two Jesus boys, I told her, I want nothing at all to do with this absurd anthroposophy. Interestingly, here I am, 50 years later, giving a lecture on this topic. Oh, sweet karma. Now back to you, Aliodor.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It was an amazing lecture. It gave me answers to questions I had long thought about, and it's for sure a good preparation for the weeks to come of Advent and the nights, the holy nights. I will work on it and I will share it with all my friends that do not understand English, but I will translate it to them in Romanian. Thank you so much. Now, if anybody has questions, you can ask them through the Q&A. You can also raise your hands and I will see it, and I will then open the microphone for you. I also have a question of my own, if that would be all right. It was a question that I prepared in advance because I thought about it and I was sure that you would have the answer for it, or maybe give me a hint. What happened to the Solomaic, I don't know how is it pronounced in English, Jesus boy after the merging? I thought about it since years ago, and because of this theme, I am very curious.
Well, yeah, that's a question I think all of us have when we first hear about this, and we wonder what happened. And Steiner does say that now, as a egoless entity, the boy is going to die within the next year, but he doesn't say anything more. I assume that if his parents, and he doesn't say, did he actually physically go to Jerusalem? And was he behind the curtain in the Holy of the Holies? Or was it just the Luke Jesus? So some others have written on this, but I'm just going to say I don't know the answer of whether he was present to Jesus there in Jerusalem, or as implied in the Pistis Sophia, this merging happened without him having to be physically present. And so if he stayed behind up in Nazareth, then sometime in the months ahead, he would have died. And the families would have mourned and that kind of stuff. But he now is in the other family, which is fascinating there. And that gets into lots. If those of you who are on the call are also wondering, let me point you to Steiner's Fifth Gospel, because there are some wonderful passages about his relationship that he develops with the Mary who was the mother of the other Jesus, the Luke Jesus. Back to you, Aliota.
Thank you so much. What this lecture also brought to me was a deeper understanding of all the plays that we did in the Waldorf kindergarten, also in the school. I am now preparing for the bazaar we will have here in our course in Bucharest, and all the images of my childhood and working together, it brought me such joy and warmth, and this is something that I will cherish for at least for this Advent period.
Thank you. Yeah.
I we have a questions here. Sorry. Does Steiner say anything about the virgin birth?
Saying in this fifth gospel, he says that he had this amazing long discussion with the other Mary, who is not his mother, but becomes his stepmother in a sense. And this is just before the baptism, when after he had explored the world, so to speak, and had found it just full of decadence, that it was irreparable. And so his ego leaves the three sheaths, as which he had done before with the Matthew Jesus, and this Jesus of Nazareth then is able to walk down to the Jordan River and receive, you might say, the ego of Christ. Now, at that moment in this time walking down to the Jordan, Steiner says that a spiritual experience happens for Mary and she becomes a virgin. But in what sense is that meant? Is it meant physically, or is it an etheric or spiritual meaning to it? And when we go to the Annunciation, it's to the Mary in Luke, and this was an only child for her. In Matthew, it's through Joseph that the angel is speaking. And so in Matthew, we can't talk about a virgin birth, but in Luke, we probably could. And in this sense, if we look back, have there been virgin births? And we can ask the question way, way back, when humans were androgynous beings, how did they procreate? And there's a kind of knowing, as it says in the Bible, which causes the conception, which is a word out of knowledge, also that we have. So I'm going to have to leave it as a kind of mystery, but I hope that gives you enough, Sophia.
It is very good that when we have such open questions, because it entices us to look some more and to work ourselves. And this is the right period to do that. I see we have another, let's say, question. Could you discuss the kingly line of the Matthew child and the priestly line of the Luke child? This lineage is described as through Joseph. Why was this lineage discussion important?
Yeah. In the Matthew, he describes 42. And what I was trying to point out is, and it's way more complicated, but that from what was given through, brought into our heredity to be passed along the way we sexually procreate, first into Abraham, then was physically prepared, then etherically prepared, and then astrally prepared. And it took 42 generations because for the maturity, it had to go from grandfather to grandson through a father. So it's actually 14 years for that whole cycle to complete. And then there were 7 for the 7 planets. So you have 14 generations for that. And for each, the physical, etheric, and astral. And that gets us the 42 generations. In Luke, And so, sorry, Matthew is only taking us back because he's actually writing for the Jews. It only takes us back as far as Abraham. And so, because this is an earthly aspect, it's the Zarathustra, it's what had come to earth and now is developing the wisdom from the earth looking up, and not the Abel, which is from above looking down. Okay, now the Abel lineage, if I can call it that, has 77 progenitors going all the way back to Adam, who was then the son of God. And 77 would be 7 times 11. And in these 11, if I remember this correctly, it couldn't be 12. It had to happen before we get to 12. And I think because 12 is when this kind of lineages comes to an end. So Christ had to come sort of before, and now we're looking back over this whole period of time, going all the way back to Polaris, to the beginning, to when humanity first begins with the earth, all the way back to in the beginning was the Logos. So I hope that helps, but
I'm sure it does. It is very interesting, and I have to go and read more on that because you just opened some more questions, but we are nearing the end, so I won't go into them. But I did visit Italy, and I did visit Florence, and I know that from what I've read there and going through the history and so on, I've read that Leonardo did not have a formal education. So, okay, you talked about him a bit, but how did he come to have such insights? It's
it's part of who he was. And we all had formal education, right? And somehow we learned things. And for Leonardo, he had Verrocchio's art studio, but he's not there all the time. He's mixing in these things. He's getting an incredible education somehow, but it's not a formal one. And that education never taught him Latin. And it's very interesting to read what Steiner had to say about how learning Latin affects your thinking. It thinks for you when you learn Latin. And so, by not learning Latin, he was able to go well beyond where the academics were of that time. And he makes some comment, and I don't know all what he's referring to, but he makes some snide comment that all these intellectuals of his time have never drank from the fountain of wisdom, where he has.
okay. Okay, thank you. I'm thinking about the fact that I didn't learn Latin in school. I didn't have the chance. So now this I take it as a good thing.
I had ninth grade, I had in 10th grade, I had 2 years of Latin. Oops. That's why I am the way I am.
Yeah,
Although I wasn't a good student in Latin.
yeah. Yeah. I was quite okay, but I think Latin would have helped me. Maybe just a bit would have given me some structure. I think we are nearing the end of the allotted time for the webinar. So I was thinking about ending with a verse.
Right.
You said something about the calendar of the soul. And I prepared a verse from the calendar of the soul, week 38.
Thank you.
So, if I may, I feel the spirit child set free from spell in womb of soul. The holy cosmic world conceived in clarity of heart. The heaven fruit of hope, which joyous grows towards farthest worlds, out of my being's godly ground. Thank you
Perfect.
so much.
Thank you, Aliodor. I want to commend you. What a great job as the host. And thank you all here for participating. So with that, we say goodbye.
Goodbye.